You probably think nuclear war was avoided because leaders on both sides were rational, because the technology worked, because the system had checks and balances that prevented one mistake from ending everything. That is what most people believe. It is not what happened. On September 26, 1983, the decision that saved the world from nuclear annihilation was made by a single Soviet officer who was filling in for someone else on the night shift. He had 4 minutes to decide. He had no way to verify what he was seeing, and everything about his training, his orders, and the system he served told him to do the exact opposite of what he did. His name was Stanislav Petrov. You have probably never heard of him. The Soviet Union made sure of that. So did the Russian government after. But that night, in a bunker outside Moscow, he looked at a screen telling him American missiles were in the air, and he decided not to believe it. He was right. If he had been wrong, you would not be here. Neither would anyone else. The strange part is not that he made the right call. The strange part is that making the right call almost destroyed his life, because the system he worked for could not afford for him to be right. Let me explain what actually happened. September 1983. The Cold War is not winding down. It is at its most dangerous point in decades. Ronald Reagan has called the Soviet Union an evil empire on national television. NATO is running war games called Able Archer that simulate nuclear release procedures so realistic Soviet intelligence thinks it might be cover for an actual first strike. Both sides have thousands of nuclear warheads aimed at each other. Launch to impact time is under 30 minutes. The entire strategy for preventing war is called mutually assured destruction. The idea is simple. If you launch, we launch. Everyone dies, no one wins, so no one launches. The system depends on one thing: speed. If the other side launches, you have minutes to detect it, decide, and fire back before their missiles destroy your ability to respond. Minutes. That means human decision-making has been reduced as much as possible. Automated early warning systems, satellite detection, instant relay to command. The faster the system, the safer everyone is. That was the theory. The problem is that speed and accuracy are not the same thing. And in 1983, the Soviet early warning system was new. It was called OKO. It used satellites with infrared sensors to detect the heat signature of American missiles launching. It had been operational for less than a year, and it had a problem. Sunlight reflecting off clouds at certain angles could look exactly like a missile launch. The Soviets knew this. They were working on it, but the system was active. It was watching. And on the night of September 26th, it saw something. Stanislav Petrov was not supposed to be there. He was covering someone else's shift. He was 44 years old, a lieutenant colonel, not a combat officer, a software engineer, an analyst. He had worked on the OKO system. He knew how it worked. He knew its weaknesses. His job that night was to sit in a bunker called Serpukhov 15 and monitor the satellite feed. If the system detected a launch, his job was simple: pick up the phone, report it to Soviet High Command. That is it. He was not supposed to interpret. He was not supposed to decide. He was a relay, a human wire between the machine and the men who would order retaliation. Just after midnight, the system started screaming. Sirens, flashing red lights, the word launch on the screen in front of him. 1 American missile detected, then 2, then 5. The computer reported maximum confidence, highest reliability. It was certain. The protocol was clear. Report to command immediately. Petrov had 4 minutes before impact. Everyone in the room looked at him. He did not pick up the phone. He sat there, reasoning out loud. If the Americans were launching a first strike, why only 5 missiles? Soviet military doctrine said any American attack would involve hundreds of missiles, simultaneous, overwhelming, designed to destroy Soviet command and control before they could respond. 5 missiles made no sense, too few to win, just enough to guarantee Soviet retaliation. Why would they do that? And the system was new. It had glitches. The satellites had that sunlight problem. But he had no proof, no radar confirmation. Ground radar would not pick up the missiles for several more minutes. Too late to matter. The computer said maximum confidence. His training said trust the machine. His orders said report immediately. And he was sitting there in a room full of people, holding a phone, doing nothing. He later said his first thought was that it was real, that he was watching the world end. But he did not believe it. Not enough to make the call, so he reported it as a system malfunction. Low confidence. Possible. False alarm. He did not say the missiles were real. He did not escalate. He waited. The minutes passed. No impacts, no secondary confirmations. Ground radar saw nothing. The system had been wrong. It was sunlight, reflecting off clouds over North Dakota, misread as missile exhaust. If Petrov had followed protocol, Soviet leadership would have had minutes to decide whether to launch a counterstrike. We do not know what they would have done. There is no official record of how close it came, but we know what happened to Petrov. He was not promoted. He was not celebrated. He was interrogated, reassigned, quietly retired early. No commendation, no public acknowledgement. He was reprimanded for incomplete paperwork during the incident. The Soviet Union never admitted it happened. For 15 years, the story was classified. Petrov lived on a small pension, in poverty. When the story finally came out in 1998, the West called him a hero. The Russian government said nothing. Because Petrov had done something the system could not forgive. He proved the machine could be wrong. And if the machine could be wrong, the entire logic of nuclear deterrence fell apart. So, here is what you need to understand about why that night happened the way it did. The Soviet early warning. System was built on a very specific fear. American missiles could reach Moscow in under 30 minutes. If the United States launched first, the Soviets had to know immediately, not in an hour, not after checking twice, immediately. Because if they waited to be sure, their missiles would be destroyed in their silos before they could fire back. The entire point of nuclear deterrence was that retaliation had to be guaranteed, certain, automatic. So the Soviets built OKO, a satellite network with infrared sensors pointed at American missile fields. The moment a rocket ignited, the heat signature would trigger an alert. The satellites went live in 1982, less than a year before Petrov sat down in that chair. The system had a problem. Sunlight reflecting off clouds at the right angle looked exactly like a missile launch to the sensors. The engineers knew this. They were working on it. But the system was active. It was watching. And the officers monitoring it were told to trust it. Because if they hesitated during a real attack, millions of people would die. That was the logic. Speed over certainty. The system over the person. And on September 26, 1983, Stanislav Petrov was the person. He was 44, a lieutenant colonel. He had worked on parts of the OKO system as a software engineer. He understood how the satellites worked. He knew about the glitches. He was not a combat officer. He had never been in battle. He had never launched anything. His job was to sit in a bunker called Serpukhov 15 and watch the screen. If the satellites detected a launch, he was supposed to pick up the phone and report it. That is all. He was not supposed to analyze whether it made sense. He was not supposed to second-guess the machine. He was a relay, a human piece of wire between the computer and the generals who would decide whether to fire back. The night shift was considered low stakes, fewer officers around, less oversight. Petrov was covering for someone else. He was not supposed to be there. The Soviet system put the most important choke point in the nuclear chain in the hands of someone filling in on the night shift. That should tell you something. Just after midnight, the alarm went off. Not a beep. A full shrieking siren, red lights flashing. The screen in front of Petrov lit up with the word launch. One American missile inbound, then a second alert, 2 missiles, then 5. The computer reported maximum confidence, highest reliability. It was certain, the protocol was clear. Call Soviet High Command, report the launch. Let them decide whether to fire back. Petrov had 4 minutes before the missiles hit, maybe less. Ground radar would not pick them up for several more minutes. By then, it would be too late. The satellites were the only warning, and the satellites said the missiles were real. Everyone in the room looked at Petrov, waiting. He did not pick up the phone. He started talking out loud, reasoning through it. If the Americans were launching, why only 5 missiles? Soviet military doctrine said an American first strike would involve hundreds of missiles, all at once, designed to destroy Soviet leadership and missile sites before they could respond. 5 missiles made no sense. Not enough to win, just enough to guarantee the Soviets would fire back. Why would the United States do that? And the system was new. It had problems. The sunlight issue. He had no proof the alert was false, but he had no proof it was real either. Just the computer and his orders. Petrov later said his first thought was that it was real, that he was about to die, that everyone was. But he did not believe it enough, not enough to make the call. So he picked up the phone and reported it as a system malfunction. Low confidence. Possible error. He did not say the missiles were real. He did not escalate. He overrode the computer. He put his judgment above the machine. And he waited. The minutes crawled by. No impacts, no secondary alerts. Ground radar saw nothing. The system had been wrong. Later they figured out what happened. Sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds over North Dakota. The satellites misread it as rocket exhaust. A glitch. A mistake. Exactly the kind of thing Petrov knew could happen. If he had followed his orders, Soviet leadership would have had minutes to decide. We do not know what they would have chosen. There is no record of how close they came. But we know what the system wanted Petrov to do, and we know what happened to him for refusing. He was not promoted. He was not given a medal. Soviet officials did not acknowledge the incident, not publicly, not privately. Petrov was interrogated, asked over and over why he had not followed protocol, why he had questioned the computer, why he had delayed. He was reprimanded for incomplete paperwork during the crisis. His superior officer was also reprimanded, possibly punished for what Petrov had done. In 1984, Petrov took early retirement. He lived on a pension of around $200 a month, in poverty. The story stayed classified for 15 years. When it finally came out in 1998, Western journalists called him a hero. The Russian government said nothing, because Petrov had done something unforgivable, not to the world, to the system. He proved the machine could fail. He proved that automation, and speed and satellites and protocols could all be wrong. And if the machine could be wrong, then the entire structure of Soviet nuclear deterrence was built on a lie. The system needed officers to trust it, completely, without question, because hesitation meant death. Petrov hesitated. He was right, but being right made it worse. If he had been wrong, if the missiles had been real and he had delayed the response, he would have been responsible for the destruction of the Soviet Union. He would have been a traitor, a coward, the worst failure in human history. But he was right. And that meant the system had failed. Not him, the system. And the Soviet Union could not afford to admit that. So they buried him, retired him quietly, erased the incident, paid him just enough to survive, and hoped no one would ever find out. Petrov spent the rest of his life knowing he had saved the world, and knowing the world he saved did not want him to exist. Here is what you need to sit with. The system that was supposed to prevent nuclear war almost caused it, not because it failed, because it worked exactly as designed. Think about that. The Soviet early warning network did its job. It detected heat signatures. It flagged them as launches. It reported maximum confidence. It told Petrov to call his superiors. The technology performed perfectly. The problem was that perfect performance required a human being to trust it without question, and Petrov did not. You probably think that makes him a hero. In a way it does. But here is the part that should disturb you. Petrov was not confident. He did not know he was right. He gambled. He sat in that chair and made a guess. If he had been wrong, if those missiles had been real, the United States would have destroyed the Soviet Union while Petrov hesitated. Millions dead. Because one man doubted the machine. The Soviet leadership understood this. That is why they punished him. Not for being wrong, for being right in a way that revealed the entire system was broken. Because if one officer could override the computer based on a hunch, then the whole idea of automated early warning was a lie. Deterrence only worked if retaliation was certain, instant, guaranteed. Petrov proved it was not. He proved that the system depended on a person choosing to disobey at exactly the moment disobedience made the least sense, and you cannot build a nuclear strategy on that. So they buried him, pensioned him off at $200 a month, kept the story classified for 15 years. When it finally came out in 1998, the Russian government said nothing. No acknowledgement, no medal, no gratitude, because the story made their weapons system look weak. It made automation look unreliable. It made the entire structure of Soviet military power look like it had nearly collapsed because of a software glitch and some clouds over North Dakota. Now, here is the thing nobody wants to say out loud. Petrov is probably not the only one. Think about it. The Cold War lasted more than 40 years. Both sides had early warning systems. Both sides had false alarms. We know the United States had them too. In 1979, a training tape accidentally loaded into NORAD computers and showed a full Soviet launch. For 6 minutes, officers believed it was real. In 1980, a faulty computer chip reported incoming missiles, twice in 1 week. These are just the ones we know about, the ones that got declassified. How many others were there? How many times did someone sit in a chair, look at a screen, and have to decide in minutes whether to end the world? And how many of those people chose doubt over obedience? We do not know. We will probably never know, because the systems that nearly killed us do not want those stories told. Petrov only became public because a Russian newspaper reporter found out in the late 1990s and published it. If that had not happened, you would never have heard his name. He would have died in poverty and silence. The decision that saved your life would have stayed classified. You would have gone your whole life not knowing how close it came. And that is the truth about these systems, the nuclear weapons, the automated detection, the chains of command, the protocols. They are not designed to prevent disaster. They are designed to make disaster look impossible. To make you believe that rational leaders and good technology and proper procedures will keep you safe, but they do not. What keeps you safe is the person willing to disobey, the one who looks at the screen and the orders and the machine all telling them one thing and chooses to believe something else. Not because they know, because they doubt, and institutions hate that. They cannot train for it. They cannot automate it. They cannot control it. So they punish it. Petrov spent the last decades of his life giving occasional interviews. He died in 2017 at age 77. By then, some people in the West knew his name. A few organizations gave him awards. He was called the man who saved the world. But he did not see it that way. He said he was just doing his job. He said he got lucky. He said the system was broken and someone needed to fix it. Nobody did. Those systems are still running. The missiles are still armed. The detection networks are more advanced now, faster, more automated, and somewhere, right now, there is probably someone sitting in a chair like Petrov did, watching a screen, waiting, trained to trust the machine, ordered to report immediately. And if that screen lights up, if the alarm goes off, if the computer says launch, What will that person do? Will they doubt? Will they hesitate? Will they risk being catastrophically wrong to avoid being obediently right? You do not know. I do not know. They probably do not know. And that is what should keep you up at night. Not that the system failed in 1983, that it succeeded. It did exactly what it was built to do. It put the decision in the hands of a person who was supposed to trust it. Petrov just chose not to. The next person might choose differently. And we would never know until it was too late. That is the real story. Not that one man saved the world, that the world was never as safe as you were told, that the systems built to protect you are also the systems most likely to destroy you, and that survival does not depend on those systems working. It depends on someone, somewhere, having the courage to believe they are wrong.